In professional wrestling, it's not always easy for stories to remain consistent over time. Wrestlers have to turn heel and face quite often, and sometimes act like it didn't just happen. And not to mention, the stories themselves are being booked by an ever-changing creative team that, in the case of the previous regime, was also controlled by a crazy booker who makes up things and changes them on the fly all the time. But the new regime led by Triple H has done a mostly good job at fixing this issue, and weaving together a main event scene and a whole thread of great stories that are all intertwined. One character making a single choice in this spider web has ripple effects and consequences on other stories that are all unfolding at the same time. The WWE for the first time in ages actually feel like an interactive world with complex characters that all impact one another on a level that's just more nuanced than two wrestlers feuding with each other, and once the feud is over they both move on and the whole story has no real bearing on the landscape of the company at large. And this change makes the product infinitely more engaging. Granted, some issues and logic gaps in the storytelling from the previous era still persist and still do carry over to the current one. For example, the currently ongoing stories in the WWE are heavily influenced by the breakup of the Shield over 10 years ago, but they casually ignore that they reunited multiple times, and back then Roman Reigns moved on rather quickly. But I digress. For the most part, the stories in the main event scene are very consistent, with a whole variety of characters in them all intertwined in some way, shape, or form, even if they're not directly speaking to one another. And the topic of today's video is just that, the beauty of WWE's intertwined main event scene. So in this video, I'll primarily cover Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Drew McIntyre, Cody Rhodes, Solo Sikoa, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, and Randy Orton. So to go through things in chronological order, we have to start with Roman and Seth. We all know what happened. On one fateful day in June of 2014, to everyone's surprise and heartbreak, Seth Rollins betrayed his brother-in-arms. In particular, attacking Roman Reigns first, steel chair to back. As far as we're talking about how this ties into the events that are currently unfolding, on a level beyond just, oh, they still hate each other, the explanation that WWE themselves is going with is that this betrayal permanently changed Roman Reigns as a person on a very intimate level. The characters that have directly mentioned this are Roman Reigns himself, Seth Rollins, and most recently, Sami Zayn. The 4 years of the Bloodline ruling over the WWE, and all the damage that they caused towards their enemies, as well as the trauma, the abuse, and the infighting among their own family members can all be traced back to this one singular point. Roman's abusive and untrusting nature, and his belief that he has to rule through fear and control in order to avoid being taken advantage of, all stem from this one betrayal. Okay, so a brief pause. You can poke a lot of holes in this logic, because, for example, back then, Roman moved on rather quickly. If anything, Ambrose was more upset. And of course, the biggest plot hole would be the fact that they reunited multiple times. They seem very selective on what actually counts as canon and what doesn't. I've seen some people come up with some extremely far-fetched justification to factor the reunions into the stories, but they're just too contrived for me to take it seriously, so I'm just gonna write them off as not canon because they came from a period where Vince was the most creatively bankrupt he's ever been. But moving on, as of Survivor Series 2024, this never-ending hatred between Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns have brought about yet another set of ramifications. Going off of what he said to Cody Rhodes, Seth feels some degree of guilt over his role in what happened to Roman Reigns, but he seems to think that he's done his part after helping Cody defeat Roman at WrestleMania 40, and past that point, people should just start holding Roman himself accountable instead of blaming anybody else, and making Roman out to be some misunderstood victim, which, let's be real, he is completely right there. And because of this, even though the original Bloodline, Jey, Jimmy, and Sami has forgiven Roman, Seth hasn't, and he vehemently refused to team with them. And this is what I meant when I said that WWE's main event scene is intertwined. This simple action alone has kickstarted yet another chain of events. With Rollins' absence, CM Punk had to fill in the empty spot, and there is something clearly going on between him, Paul Heyman, and Roman, even if the issues have been temporarily resolved for now. CM Punk is sorta like a mercenary in this whole ordeal. He isn't really taking any sides, he's just in it for himself. And even though this part is not explicitly stated, Seth was furious that CM Punk filled in his empty spot, helped the guy that he hated, and got a huge look out of it by the time the show was over. You can see that Seth is spiraling, and it's not only this one thing. It's the culmination of the actions of different characters all operating in the same realm. The Bloodline being once again back in power after Rollins sacrificed so much to end Roman. Seeing his comrades, the people he trusted and fought alongside, forgiving Roman so easily and not holding him accountable. And in the midst of all this, his arch-nemesis, CM Punk, trying to cash in on the drama for his own gain. All of this is going to reach a boiling point soon for Seth. In any corner of this huge connected narrative, whatever one character does is affecting other characters in other places, and spawning endless spin-offs. And there is so much more than just the original Bloodline and Seth and CM Punk. You have the Bloodline 2.0, whose enemies with literally everyone, and they may be the most clear-cut bad guys in the story, but they have something that nobody else does, and that's unity. And they're an actually cohesive unit with no drama or infighting, which is why they still have the Ulafala. This in turn puts Roman Reigns in a huge predicament. He can beat Solo in as many different ways as he likes. Ultimately, he cannot move on without regaining the Ulafala, which also isn't that simple. Other characters also involved in this story aren't just going to wait around for these two to finish fighting. One of the Bloodline's biggest victims, Drew McIntyre, the guy who never changed his stance on the Bloodline, he wants his get back. He's literally hunting down the Bloodline one by one, and will most likely interfere in the match at the Raw on Netflix. And Drew's motivations are also going to impact the scene in a way that's more than just himself. Why? Because Seth Rollins will soon start to align himself with McIntyre. They've already planted the seeds for this, and this is more significant than just two heels with a common goal simply coming together. This marks a shift in mentality for Seth, because he didn't feel this way just last year. He called out Drew on his victim mentality, and did not approve of Drew lashing out on people like Sami and Jay. But little by little, he'll start to feel the same way as Drew, and this is a consequence of Jay, Jimmy, and Sami being too lenient on Roman, instead of just letting him actually pay for his actions. Elsewhere, even on a different brand entirely, Cody and Kevin are having the exact same issue, and just by the look on his face, it appears that Drew McIntyre is scheming some sort of anti-Bloodline alliance of his own, one that is against both Bloodlines, and also half-hearted diplomats like Cody and Sami. There are so many factions and so many moving parts. It's enough content to last years, and the drama hasn't gotten old yet. Well, to me, the story between Roman and Solo is extremely dull, but besides that is. For all we know, Roman's WrestleMania match could be against anyone from Drew, The Rock, Solo, and Jacob Fatu. From just one Bloodline terrorizing the WWE, and all the babyfaces unanimously agreeing that they're terrible, we're now seeing a lot of different alliances, and it all just spun off from one story, because the characters are actually allowed to have different personalities, and react to the same thing differently. People like Cody and Sami probably shouldn't be forgiving Roman, but they're generally kind and compassionate guys, and you can't fault them for that. But if they have the rights to be benevolent and forgiving, then they also can blame people like Seth, Drew, and Kevin Owens for losing their faith in them. Conflict is inevitable, and is brilliant. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. See you guys.